Good evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of Faculty of Architecture Alumni Association at CEPT University, I'd like to welcome everyone to the FAAA Lecture Series. Today's lecture is by Dr. Vandana Shiva on Seeds of Freedom, Gardens of Hope, Designing Earth and Human-Centered Cities and Countryside. Dr. Shiva is a person who needs no introduction. She is a globally renowned environmentalist and activist working on issues of food security, sustainable agriculture, intellectual property rights, genetic modified crops, bioethics, and such other related topics. After completing her PhD in quantum physics from University of Western Ontario, she shifted to interdisciplinary research in science, technology, and environmental policy, which she carried out at the IISc and IIM in Bangalore. In 1991, she founded Navdanya, a network of seed keepers and organic producers spread across 17 states to promote organic farming and fair trade. Navdanya has worked with more than 500,000 farmers from across local communities, and through their effort, they have conserved more than 3,000 rice varieties and established 60 seed banks in 16 states across the country. In 2004, Dr. Shiva started Bija Vidyapit, an international college for sustainable living in Doon Valley in collaboration with Schumacher College, UK. Dr. Shiva has campaigned internationally on issues surrounding biotechnology and genetic engineering. She has helped movements in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Ireland, Switzerland, and Austria with their campaigns against genetic engineering. In 2003, Dr. Shiva launched a global citizens campaign on GMOs in the WTO. Dr. Shiva's contribution to gender issues are nationally and internationally recognized. She founded the Gender Unit at the International Center for Mountain Development, ICIMOD, in Kathmandu, and was the founding board member. Dr. Shiva's contribution to gender issues are nationally and internationally recognized. Dr. Shiva initiated the Diverse Women for Diversity, an international movement of women working for food and agriculture. The movement was launched formally in Bratislava, Slovakia in May 1998. Dr. Shiva is on the National Board of Organic Standards of India. She has also served on the advisory board of the National Controller and Commissioner of Accounts from 2013 to 2015. She also works with state governments of Kerala, Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, Uttaranchal for promotion of organic farming. She has been invited by the Planning Commission to be a member of the expert group on environment, expert group on nutrition, and expert group on the voluntary sector. Internationally, Dr. Shiva serves on the Prince Charles Expert Group on Sustainable Agriculture, and she is a member of the Scientific Committee in Spain. Dr. Shiva advises governments worldwide and is currently working with government of Bhutan to make Bhutan 100% organic. She is also working with governments of Tuscany and Rome. Time magazine identified Dr. Shiva as an environmental hero in 2003, and Asia Week has called her one of the 5 most powerful communicators in Asia. In November 2010, Forbes magazine identified Dr. Shiva as one of the 7 most powerful women on the globe. Her books, Violence of Green Revolution and Monocultures of the Mind, pose essential challenges to the dominant paradigm of non-sustainable, reductionist, green revolution agriculture. Dr. Shiva, thank you for taking time to speak with us today. Before we start the lecture, I would like to request you all to turn your cell phones to silent. The FAAA Lecture Series is organized by the Faculty of Architecture Alumni Association. This year's lecture series is made possible through generous support from Symphony Limited. We are thankful to them. FAAA would also like to thank alumni and friends of Faculty of Architecture at CEPT University for their support. Without further ado, I welcome Dr. Shiva.
It's all right. I also speak at the top of my voice. I have to very often anyway. 1997, I had come to your campus. It was a different campus, it was a small campus. India was a different place. India was a very different place when I started my life, both in terms of ecological activism as well as the study of earth systems, ecosystems. That began 40 years ago with the Jimbo movement. Now more than 40 years, 42 years ago. I was just reminded when you picked me up this morning from the airport that the dates I was talking about, you weren't born. Most of you weren't born at that time. So you know an India which is very different from the India in which we grew up. And the India we grew up in was more gentle. In a way, the fact that your campus is so full of neem trees and peacocks is part of that India that shaped herself and designed herself around the cosmic philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The earth as a family, a place for every species. Very honored to give this year's lecture, but always feel privileged to return to Gandhi's land. Because Gandhi was the ultimate designer. He was a designer of political processes. He was definitely a designer of a new engagement in our independence movement. There was an independence movement before he returned to India in 1917, but he gave it a whole different impetus, a whole different imagination, a whole different creativity. And of course, the two aspects of his creativity that have inspired me deeply in the fact that I built Navdanya and the way we have built Navdanya. One was, of course, while he was still here in Gujarat. And when the British in 1930 got it into their head, wow, all the Indians need salt. Let's make salt a monopoly. We'll make much more money. We can have bigger police systems. We can beat them up a little more when they protest and demand freedom. And they passed the salt laws. And Gandhi did something very, very simple. He walked to Dandi Beach and picked up the salt from the sea and said, nature gives it for free. We need it for our survival. We will continue to make salt. We will not obey your laws. And of course, the practice of satyagraha didn't begin with the salt satyagraha. It began more than 2 decades before that in South Africa, when the apartheid regime in South Africa was building itself on the basis of apartheid, which means separation, separateness. And they had passed a law requiring every black, every Indian, every white to have a compulsory registration on the basis of race and wear these identity badges all the time. And that's the first time Gandhi practiced satyagraha. It was another 9/11. It was 9/11, 1906. We call it the other 9/11 based on nonviolence. And he said, no, we are one citizenry. We are equal human beings. We will not be divided by race. And of course, he and Kasturba and the Indian community went to jail, but out of that grew the African National Congress. 16 years later, Mandela was born. And when I was your age, we used to engage in anti-apartheid movement. In those days, our passports had stamps which said there were 2 countries we could not visit because of the injustice on which they were based. One was South Africa because of apartheid, and the other was Israel. We could not visit these countries on an Indian passport, not because they prevented us, but we as a nation said, we will not participate till these unjust systems stay. Now, of course, those stamps aren't put anymore. And Gandhi at that time, when he wrote about Satyagraha, and what an amazing word, the force of truth. He said, as long as the superstition exists that unjust laws must be obeyed, so long will slavery exist. This is precisely what is picked up by the civil rights movement. They just had a 50th anniversary celebration of the march to Selma, where all that people were asking for was a right to vote. Before that, they were asking for an end to segregation, where the blacks couldn't enter restaurants, they couldn't enter establishment. And in fact, even when I was doing my PhD, there used to be riots because there was segregation on buses. And there was a woman called Rosa Parks who did a Gandhian action against the fact that blacks couldn't sit on buses. And she sat down. She said, what kind of a law is this? I will not respect it because we are equal. And the whole civil rights movement got triggered from there, which is why you have an Obama as president today. And then, of course, Gandhi did the Champaran Satyagraha before 1913. The first thing he did after returning from South Africa, the senior leader said, go learn about India. Rajendra Prasad, our prime minister, first president, told him, come to Bihar and understand what's going on. And he participated in a door-to-door survey, going home to ask what indigo cultivation meant, compulsory cultivation of indigo. And he found the women had no clothes. Peasants weren't allowed to grow food so that the acreage under indigo could be maximized. And he said, what kind of agriculture is this, where those who grow the indigo for the textile industry don't have enough clothing, and they're, of course, starving. So the Champaran Satyagraha was, we will die, but we won't grow indigo. And then, of course, the fact that the Germans came up with chemical synthetic substitutes helped a little bit to end that kind of coercive indigo cultivation. So the Satyagraha part has always inspired me. And when I started Navdanya, which means 9 seeds, and I got that inspiration from a tribal farmer in Tamil Nadu, in Veerappan country, because Veerappan was such a ferocious bandit. No government officer entered his area. No agriculture extension entered his area. So it was agriculture with diversity, agriculture the way agriculture should be. And this tribal peasant was growing 9 crops in his field. I'd done the study on Punjab in 1984, where it was one giant monoculture of rice in one season and wheat in the other. And so I'd written a book, Monocultures of the Mind. I'd written the book, The Violence of the Green Revolution. So I was, of course, so excited to see 9 crops growing happily together. Just like in our society, diversity has never been a problem, unless there's a problem created through division. But we are among the most diverse societies in the world by any count. And it has always enriched us, whether biological or cultural. On the biological side, this peasant, when I said, oh, you're growing 9 crops together, he gives me this huge discourse on how the 9 planets and the 9 plants in the field and our health is all one connected whole. And by growing 9 crops, he's taking care of the cosmos. You know, the Navagraha, all these Navaratras, you do a lot of dancing, I know. But remember the next time of Navaratra, that is related to something bigger. And maybe you can do 9 seeds exchange on that day, along with all your, what do you call the dance? Garba. When you do the Garba, have a little corner for seed freedom. And if you don't have the seeds, go find someone who has the seeds. The second aspect, of course, of Gandhi that has shaped so much both of my thinking as well as the way Navdanya as a movement has been organized, and the reason it was organized, was the spinning wheel. I think it was an absolutely brilliant idea. Here was the textile industry of that time, which was based on a free trade treaty the East India Company had signed with a collapsing Mughal empire by bribing some petty official with, I think 500 rupees was the bribe. 500 rupees. And they got this, it's called the Free Trade Agreement between the Right Honorable East India Company and Farrukh Shir, the Mughal emperor. Basically did what today's free trade treaties do, what the WTO does and what other free trade treaties do. You know, gave all kinds of tax concessions, market concessions to the East India Company, and created an uneven playing field where the domestic is punished and the international trade is rewarded. And by the time Gandhi came to India, our domestic textile production and handloom production was down to 5% of the market. We were importing textiles. And that's why on the one hand he pulled out the spinning wheel and said, we'll make our own cloth. If we don't make our own cloth, even if we get independence, politically, if we don't have economic independence, we'll never be free. And I think Gandhi is the only one who defined economic independence in terms of Swadeshi, and defined Swaraj as self-organization, a deep principle of design. So when we started, when I realized what the corporations wanted, and this was at a meeting in 1987 in Geneva and on the border of Geneva in France. And it was a very small think tank with the old chemical companies, the United Nations, and some of us independent scientists saying, what will the new biotechnologies mean? There were no GMOs in the market. No GMO had been developed, but there was this recognition by the industry that now that the tools of recombinant DNA have been evolved, where you can splice genes from one organism, put it into an unrelated organism, because normal breeding is within the species itself. For them it was a brilliant tool. They had no idea what they'd apply it to in 1987. They had no idea what kind of crops they would produce as GMOs. But this was the conversation. They said the only way we can grow in the future is by controlling the seed, because selling chemicals will not be very popular in the long run. So we've got to use the new technologies called biotechnologies in order to be able to claim a patent on seed. A patent is granted for an invention. Just right in design, you get copyright and you get trademarks for logos and brand recognition, and you get breeders' rights. There are all kinds of intellectual property. But till that time, intellectual property had never been applied to living systems. I realized it was so wrong for the simple reason no one invents a seed. A seed is there, it evolves, it changes. You add one gene. I brought these books, I've got my little notepad here. Does my bringing this notebook into your university give me the right to say, I made this campus, I am the owner, and all of the students should be paying me the fees? And of course, the university should be paying me a rent. It would be considered insane. You would never invite me for this talk. And yet that insanity taken beyond buildings into life was allowed to be passed. It didn't just happen. Monsanto later went on record to say, we wrote the WTO Intellectual Property Rights Agreement. We were the patient, diagnostician, and physician all in one. And why did they say they were sick? Why were they a patient? and these are recorded in my books like Biopiracy and other books. They said they were falling sick because farmers saved seeds. And the cure for their disease was make seed saving a crime. And that's what intellectual property rights were about. Because, you know, if it's a Mike and here's a Ahuja who's got his name out here, if he's done this legally, would have had to pay a license to the company that did the original Mike design. But it's between manufacturers of a certain level. The difference between a patent on a machine like this and a patent on life is, first, this is actually manufactured. It's put together piece by piece. A seed is not a manufacture. It is a self-organized system. And that's why I've never accepted patents on life. But the second reason is that those from whom you collect the royalty are not other industry, because in seed, today there are 5 corporations controlling the seed supply through GMOs. And once they've got patents on GMOs, then they move on and start taking patents on other things too. I had to fight the patent on neem. You have so much neem. In '84, I started the campaign, No More Bhopals, Let's Plant a Neem. '94, I find there's a patent on neem. The world's first use of neem as a pesticide. A chemical company in Massachusetts. 11 years we fought that case, and we defeated the US and W.R. Grace jointly. They held the patent together. And this was when US was telling all of us, there's no business for government to be in business. And yet they were thick with business to take control over the living resources of the world. So basically, in seed, the royalty is collected from the peasant. And again, this itself is doubly wrong, because first, whatever seeds the corporations say they have invented and have a patent on has come from farmers. Because 99.9% breeding has been done by farmers, primarily women farmers, because if you look at seed, before corporations come into it, women are the breeders, and they are intelligent breeders. I've seen festivals in Chhattisgarh where they do scientific tests of germination with 21 seeds. The only difference is they don't sit in a lab, they turn it into a beautiful ceremony. And we have this apartheid again, a separation. The moment we see culture, we put it into a box of irrelevance. And we think there's no science in it. The New Year celebration of Karnataka called Ugadi, 9 seeds germinated for 9 days. And by looking at which seed is doing well, they use it for the planting. And if they find one isn't doing well, they go to a neighbor, they go to a relative, so that at no point has there been a crop failure in this country. Because you always had systems of building insurance and systems of sharing. Seed was a commons. So one, you claim as your invention that which has been collectively invented, innovated by farmers. And in the early days, in the days when all this was happening in the country, you know, I got involved in drafting many of the laws of the country, the Plant Varieties Farmers' Rights Act, and we made sure farmers' rights were enshrined in law, the Biodiversity Act. We got involved with working with parliamentarians, all parties worked together, from the BJP to the left. And we put into our patent law 2 clauses which are vital. Because there's Article 3 of patent law says what is not an invention. So things like mathematical formula are not inventions. A trivial modification of something that's already been invented is not an invention. And this is at the heart of the pharmaceutical fights, because the Novartis tried to claim a patent on an existing cancer drug called Glivec. And they lost in the patent office, they lost in the Supreme Court. But there's a lesser known article called 3J. And it's lesser known because we've got so used to ignoring our farmers, that what affects them we don't notice. 3J, I did a lot of work to ensure that biological processes will not be counted as inventions. And I'm so proud that the Patent Office last year rejected Monsanto's very broad spectrum patent on all climate resilient crops. And the Patent Office said, you've added a gene, a stress-tolerant gene, but that gene is known, and here are 50 papers about it. And you've added it to existing plants which reproduce themselves. You are not doing the reproduction. Biological reproduction is a biological process and therefore not inventable. So it was rejected. Same time in the US, Monsanto sued a farmer who had bought grain in the market and planted his soya crop. And the Supreme Court of US said, this in effect is replicating and stealing a machine. You know, because if you go to grant a patent, you have to define seed as machine. And then a seed reproducing itself in the field is defined as a farmer stealing a machine. So ontologically, it is so flawed, which is why I wrote an open letter to President Obama when he was coming here on 26th of January for our Republic Day, because one part of his piece was to put pressure on getting India to change her intellectual property laws, so that our courts start giving rulings like their Supreme Court. I'm doing the opposite. Not only do I write open letters, I go there and train the American citizens on satyagraha. 4 states have shut down seed-saving initiatives in this last few months in the United States. In California, a new law they showed me was, from now onwards, a person will include a corporation. So all rights that individuals have, the corporation will have. But the other is even more interesting. It said, you can't exchange seed beyond 3 miles. So I've told them, I said, go to the 3.1 mile and do a seed satyagraha. And if I'm available, I'll travel all the way and join you. Because that's what we've done in this country to defend the rights of our farmers. In 2004, Sharad Pawar had tried to introduce a similar law. And I traveled the length and breadth of the country and informed farmers. And then I collected all the signatures, more than 100,000, took them to Dr. Manmohan Singh and said, we are in Gandhi's land. And if Gandhi said no to salt laws, we are saying no to seed laws that make it illegal for farmers to not just exercise their rights, but something deeper, perform their duties to the earth, to each other, and to future generation. The right to save and exchange seed flows from the duty to save and exchange seed. The reason it was so easy for me to collect seeds and set up Navdanya was if I went to a farmer, they would very freely give me seeds. Because in India, it is considered a sin to say no. It's considered a sin to destroy the seed. So when in our region of Garhwal, I'm from Uttarakhand, you know, we had a whole invasion by the Gorkhas, the Nepalese. And there was a war and there was famine. And later, in every house where people had starved to death, the tomris, which are these big squash containers, were full of grain for the seed. No one had touched the seed. They had died, but left the seed for the future. And that's why it's a duty. And so we said, you know, here is our commitment to do our duty. We won't obey it. You can pass the law, you'll look stupid. And we went to Parliament and we briefed the parliamentarians, and the Parliament included so many amendments, including liability for the corporations, and then Monsanto wanted to destroy that law. So it hasn't been passed. In Europe, they tried the same last year. I went and trained the Europeans on Gandhi's tactics of beat Swaraj, seed freedom, and beat Satyagraha, non-cooperation. And when they realized they wouldn't be able to implement it, with Greece collapsing, the only place where the youth can go is back to the land. And there are thousands of islands. And Brussels wanted them to take permission on what seed they'll grow. So they were more than willing to say we won't obey if this law is passed, of course. Once governments that are implementing laws that are unjust realize the people are alert and it won't be implemented, they themselves withdraw. Of course, the big issue really, for me, that connects to you is the fact that while you design structures, I try and understand the design through which the earth works. I tried to do it through my quantum theory, which was the same motivation, but now I try and do it at the level of biodiversity, ecosystems, soil, pollinators, food. And there are two very, very clear paths, two very, very clear paradigms. One is understanding that larger design of our real home, which is oikos. The word oikos is the root word for ecology and the root word for economy. Economy was supposed to be management of the household. Ecology was supposed to be the science of the household. For some reason, economy now today is trash the house. And I get tired trying to give feedback to government. We did a study last year. We called it Wealth Per Acre. And interestingly, the agriculture minister wrote a foreword, because in this we have calculated what are the social and ecological externalities, that which you don't count, of chemical industrial agriculture in this country. And it turns out to be $1.2 trillion. $1.2 trillion, the destruction of soil, the killing of birds, the water pollution, the loss of biodiversity, and through it, the loss of nutrition, and of course, the epidemic of farmer suicides. Now, the epidemic of farmer suicides is, to me, a symptom of the same problem that is causing ecological degradation. Because if we are living with awareness that this earth is our home, and any production system, including production of food that you design, must be aligned to the laws through which that home replenishes itself, replenishes soil fertility, replenishes water, replenishes the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle, all of these cycles. Understanding them, working within them, is good design. It's also the root of sustainability and justice. But when our design, is ignorant about that other design and goes ahead and works in violation of it, there are two ruptures that take place. The first rupture is in terms of the natural world, the earth. And I'll just give you two examples of what has kept the world busy since the Earth Summit in '92, in which I participated in a very intense way. We were recognizing that we are losing species at 1,000 times the normal rate. Species extinction is a huge problem. So we designed the Convention on Biological Diversity. And because by then, '92 came 5 years after 1987, I knew about biotechnology. And when the government called me to advise them, I said, whom are you sending? They said, the head of Project Tiger. I said, why would you think this is about tigers? Biodiversity is tigers and elephants. And I had to tell them biodiversity is about every living organism, the microbes in the soil, every tiny bacteria and fungi, every plant and every seed. And so they started to send me. And we managed to introduce into that convention 3 very important clauses. One, that biodiversity is a sovereign resource. Second, that indigenous knowledge must be taken into account. Because in biodiversity, we only have indigenous knowledge. Because in the last century, what's called science began with the science for war, making chemicals to kill, continued to put those chemicals into agriculture. And if I was to read out the names of the herbicides and pesticides, they are names for killing, including Roundup, about which I'll talk a little bit. So you have a century of Western science based on reductionism to chemistry. And not only was the biological world being destroyed, but an ignorance was growing. In that period, because of our poverty, we were still living in the biodiversity economy. So what does a Grace, a chemical giant, do when it wants to patent a natural pesticide? It comes to India and steals our name. What does Rice Tech do? Steals our basmati. I had to fight that case too. The wheat has been bred so much for industrialization and processing of very heavy equipment, and when you have to bake 1 million loaves of bread and you have to throw that flour around, you need a lot of elasticity in the flour, which is why gluten content has increased, which is why everyone's dying of gluten allergies now. So what does Monsanto do? Come to India to steal our wheats that don't give gluten allergies. I had to fight that case. And all these now with climate change and, parts of UP, Bundelkhand, Rajasthan, where we work, and we get direct feedback from our farmers, more than 50% crops gone. And in certain cases, there's a very tiny part of Rajasthan, which is the only part that grows the spices that are vital to the Indian kitchen. Your dhania and jeera. It has been devastated. And so on. It has been devastated. I have never seen any government plan for the biodiversity of our kitchen. When I started Navdanya, I said we're going to be different. We are not going to do organic for exports. And I'm on the national organic boards. And I would always say, why do you only think of Europe's eating good? You want to poison Indians? Why not organic for the Indian market? So our organic agency is in the export agency. Agriculture produce, APEDA, APEDA, Agriculture Produce Export Development Agency. So of course they get stuck with some coffee, some tea, some basmati, and that's it. And meantime, we build the domestic organic market. And the spices are vital because, in your haldi you get all the cadmium. The spices are the worst adulterated because the margins are so huge. So we are a biodiversity economy, but that biodiversity economy is under severe threat. But not only are we in a biodiversity economy, we are in a biodiversity paradigm. That's why when I wrote Monoculture of the Mind, I'd look at a field and say, but there's nothing growing here compared to our little terraces in Garhwal. Or I'd look at a forest, a natural rainforest in the Western Ghats. And I'd be told this doesn't have productivity. It has to be chopped down to grow eucalyptus. Or you have to have monocultures of rice and wheat, which was in the Green Revolution period. And now, of course, we are being told you have to have, at this point, either monocultures of hybrid corn from Monsanto. I think even your state has a Operation Sunshine. It is, right? Where our money is used to buy high-cost hybrid corn, which won't reproduce, and distribute it at a lower cost. One season is all it needs to not have your seed. And then you have to buy it every year. And you know where 75% of this corn is growing? It's all done in the name of feeding people.
animal feed and starch. 90% of the corn and soya globally, which accounts for most GMOs, 90% is not in food, direct human eating. It's in biofuel to drive cars, so it's the hunger of cars, and it's for factory farms. And I say even the remaining 10% wouldn't be eaten if the US could have labeling laws, because people don't want to eat. Now, Albert Howard had been sent by the British to India. And he was sent to improve Indian agriculture and make it more like Western agriculture with monocultures, chemicals. And he said, I found no pests in the field. And I found the soil was fertile. So I decided to make the pest and the peasant my professor. He wrote the Agricultural Testament, which is known as the Bible of modern organic farming. Soil Association in UK started because of that. So it started because of Howard, but Howard became what he was because of the peasant of India. And the Rodale Institute, which is the leading organic institute in the United States, was also inspired by Howard. My mother had been trapped on the other side during the partition. And she was in a senior government position, but when she became a refugee, she said, I've broken every glass ceiling. I became the first girl in my community to do a university degree. I became the first to get a high-level government job. I've done it all. Now I want to be a farmer. And so when she became a refugee, she didn't seek a government job. She became a farmer. And my father had a government job. My mother made more money out of farming than my father did with a fixed salary from government. Many, many times it was her farm income that would see us through school. Today, our farmers are committing suicide. And such a giant gulf has been created. 20, 30 years ago, you moved from a city to a village, people dressed the same way, they ate the same food, they had similar living standards. And today, of course, the hardworking farmer is either starving, half the hungry of India are farmers who are producing food, or killing themselves. And of course, then there are the non-working speculators getting super rich overnight. And the data is now coming out. 1% of the super rich globally already own 48% of the wealth of the planet. 85 individuals, 85, own more than 3.5 billion people. And if these trends continue, the 1% will own the wealth of all of the rest of humanity. And that wealth is the natural wealth, which is the first source of wealth. And then it is the wealth that society creates. Now, a farmer works very hard. And it's creating huge wealth. But the reply I always get is, oh, no, we've got to get rid of the small farmer because the GDP is too low. The agriculture GDP is too low. And I actually had a debate with Mr. Narayan Murthy of Infosys, who said the way to increase, first he said, we pumped up the Indian GDP. 0.01% of India is in software. So we pumped up the Indian GDP. But the farmers are dragging us back. So we got to reduce the denominator. GDP or productivity or efficiency is output per unit input. You can cheat on increasing growth, productivity by just lowering the bottom. Now the way it's been done, the cheating's been done in agriculture till now, is not count the fossil fuel inputs. 10 times more energy goes into the system than you get out. Not counting the financial inputs, 10 times more finance is put into an industrial agriculture system than you earn, which is why farmers get into debt. And the only input that used to be counted was labor. So resources were never counted, land was never counted, water was never counted, so we've created water famine. The last time you had the big drought, I remember traveling, seeing in Gujarat, water being drilled at 1,000 feet. Can't carry on. The farmers' suicides, the disappearance of our resources are all connected to a system which is acting like a vacuum cleaner. I call it the extractive industry. Most people think of mining as the extractive industry. I see chemical industrial agriculture as an extractive industry. It's extracting fertility from the soil. It's extracting the life of our farmers. Nearly 300,000 farmers committing suicide in the last 20 years is not a trivial phenomenon. And because I've been doing the study, started with cotton, I've been doing the studies on cotton, and of course Monsanto, I don't know how many PR people they've hired to attack me. They spend a lot of money. But I never said BT cotton, I said the monopoly on seed. But they always want to avoid the discussion on monopoly. Now, Gujarat is different. I know the Prime Minister always cites Gujarat when he justifies GMO, and I want to congratulate the government of Gujarat, which has said they will not give a no objection for GMO field trials. I don't know how many of you are aware, but your government has said no. But your neighboring Maharashtra has said yes for chickpea, wheat. Now, why is Gujarat different? I know this because I had sued Monsanto in 1998 for coming into India illegally with their GMOs. I knew the laws because I was part of building these structures in the country. And so I sued them. And in 2000, our case was still being, 2002, our case was still being heard in the Supreme Court. Meantime, the Ministry of Environment, which was standing with us in the case, suddenly brings in a case to say there's illegal planting of GMOs, of BT cotton in Gujarat, and the whole Gujarat cotton crop should be destroyed, 2002. This was March, towards the end of March. And they say, we don't know what this will do. It'll destroy the soil. It'll do this. 2nd of April, they give approval to Monsanto. The story is this. There was a breeder, and I hope he's still there, Dr. Desai, who had a company called Navbharat. And there was a Navbharat 151 variety which was doing brilliantly. Monsanto, and Monsanto's the only one which has the DNA fingerprinting. So only they can tell you whether the BT gene is there or not. And they say, we found the BT gene in the Navbharat variety. Mr. Desai said, I didn't steal from you. I don't do genetic engineering. If these traits are there, they've come through contamination. And that happens all the time. Monsanto is still paying farmers huge amounts for contaminating wheat in the US through their trials. Trials contaminate, which is why I've been fighting the open field trials that have been approved next door. And if poor Navbharat suffered, at that time, can you imagine how much the wheat growers and the chickpea growers and everyone else will suffer if contamination spreads from the trials in Maharashtra? Poor Mr. Desai had to go underground. The whole system was after him. Does anyone know what's happening to him now? Well, if you don't, yeah? He's all right, well, give him my regards. And the big difference was his seeds were very affordable, which is why Gujarati cotton farmers haven't committed suicide. But his seeds were also adapted to the soils here, which is why the average yields have been dragged up by Gujarat. Wherever there's Monsanto's BT cotton, it actually is very low and hasn't increased compared to the pre-BT cotton days. And you know the price differential between before Monsanto's BT cotton till open varieties were available for 5 to 10 rupees. Monsanto's prices went up 77,000%, which is why farmers got into debt, which is why they're committing suicide. And of course, we've had antitrust cases in MRTP. We've had a lot of action to bring it down a bit, but now they're very clever. They say, oh, the first generation of BT, the bollworm is already resistant. The pink bollworm is resistant. So now we need Bolgar 2, and through that they bring back the high prices. The way they destroy the alternative is first get the farmer to give up their seeds by using the new seeds. Second is by buying up Indian seed companies or getting them locked in licensing arrangements. I've done a study, 60 Indian cotton producing companies can't sell anything else but Monsanto's BT cotton, whose trade name is Bolgard. Can't sell anything. Of course, the difference is, in a 10 rupee economy, if they got 5%, it was very little. In a 4,000 rupee economy, that becomes much. So they themselves get more money individually, but then the country as a whole and the farmers suffer. And the third, of course, is miraculously our public systems stop working. So the Cotton Research Institute has not released a single variety in Vidarbha since Monsanto came. Now, of course, everywhere where there is a crisis, there are farmer suicides. I just did a very big gathering called Mahila Answaraj of women farmers in India. Seed savers, organic farmers. Our team from Bihar and Jharkhand couldn't come because their relatives in Bengal were so busy addressing the crisis of an epidemic of farmer suicides. In the last week, 14. I've done an analysis of that 2 years ago. Pepsi controls the potato seed, sells it expensive, gives the farmer the pesticides, the fertilizer, then buys the potato cheap. Again, that negative economy, costs of production there, what the farmer earns here. And my analysis is that every time you eat a packet of Lay's chips, less than 2% is going to the farmer. But meantime, that farmer is spending 10 times more on the cost of production. So my mother had taught me a very simple lesson when I was 6 years old, and nylon was just coming into India. And she had said, "What do you want for your birthday?" Everyone was wearing nylon frocks. And I said, "A nylon frock?" She said, "Sure, I get it for you. Just remember, every time you wear that frock, remember, an industrialist got his next Mercedes. And when you wear khadi, we grew up in khadi. When you wear khadi, a woman was able to light a fire and cook a meal for her children, your choice." That's why I've never been able to wear anything but handloom. And I hope all of you will make a commitment to seriously realize that the ultimate design of our bodies, of Gaia, the planet, of the country and the city is shaped through the metabolism of food. As our Taittiriya Upanishad says, everything is food, everything is something else's food. Now, cities have to have food, but I have till now not seen a city design which includes the food element. I did, of course, have a short experience today at the crossing at the end of the road. Or is it on this road, you have a little market coming up, and there's about 10 Maggie stalls. And of course, while coming down, I stopped because I saw Induben, my sister loves, she's on a board of a few institutions in Ahmedabad, Dr. Vandana Shiva, and she always brings back these Induben kakras. So I said, oh, she'd love it, I stopped. So I said, here's a kakra and here's Maggie, and all our young people are making a choice for Maggie, which is a choice for Nestle. This is just a metaphor. So it's Induben or Nestle, You choose. You choose, but the point is not just, if I don't wear khadi, I don't die. A weaver becomes poorer. But if I don't eat organic, I do sooner or later start suffering disease, because there is a continuity between well-being in the countryside and the well-being in the city, between the well-being of the earth and our own well-being in our bodies. In fact, my work on agriculture began partly with Punjab and the disaster of 1984, the Golden Temple, all of that, but also the disaster of Bhopal and the leak of a pesticide plant. Now, the pesticide carbaryl was meant for agriculture, but it killed people in the city. So you can't say the pesticides won't affect us. they come back. They brutally killed that day, but they're getting into our bodies all the time, which is why the cancer epidemics are things. We also launched at this Mahila Swaraj a campaign called Roundup, Roundup. How many of you know Roundup? Well, the rest don't. Roundup is a toxic chemical used as a herbicide, weedicide. It's called a broad spectrum herbicide. And in Monsanto's own language, when I used to debate them at the Rio summit, it kills everything green it comes in contact with, which is why they have evolved the Roundup resistant crops that can survive the spraying of Roundup. Now, they've continued to say it's safe. They even put in the advertisement that it's as safe as table salt. And in fact, the other day, a person who hounds me a lot, holds me responsible for killing exactly 200 million children, for exposing the fact that this genetically engineered golden rice is thousands of percent inferior in providing it vitamin A if it was to make it through development, than are vitamin A rich sources like the sehajan and the curry patta, and I mean the list can carry on. And then when you grow diversity together, I could read out, if we had time, how much more nutrition we can grow if we intensify biodiversity and intensify ecology. So Mr. Moore, his name is, he was sent to India to do propaganda 2 weeks ago, promoting golden rice and attacking people like us. And then on the way back, he stopped in Paris, and there was a smart journalist who asked him about this Roundup, glyphosate. And he said, because he works for the industry, he said, it's absolutely safe. You can drink it. And this journalist was so clever, he said, here's a glass, drink it. You think I'm stupid? And he walked away. Now that has gone viral. I'm sure some of you have seen it. Yeah? And poor Mr. Moore, I think, has lost his PR job with Monsanto. But more and more research is coming out. WHO has just said it's a probable carcinogen. French and Russian studies had shown high levels of mammalian tumors in rats fed with GMOs and Roundup-resistant GMOs. 50% of the rats. Both the Russian Academy of Sciences and a French university. And of course, what does Monsanto do? Hound the scientists. They replaced the editor who got the study retracted, but now the editor has been thrown out because of corruption. Of course, Dr. Seralini's studies are published in other places. There's other research coming out. The graphs for autism in the United States go like this, 99.9% correlation. Now, there's a book I've just edited. It's called Seed Sovereignty and Food Security, Women in the Vanguard, literally, absolutely a few days old. And I tried to do something different in this book. One, I said the whole world situation must be known, but also every part of the food system. Because we divide people into farmers, and then there's scientists, and then some work on conservation, and some work on resistance. I said, let the whole picture be there. And the scientist from MIT, what she started to do is to say, okay, there's a correlation, but could there be a causation? And what she is finding out is, one, this glyphosate has been patented by Monsanto as an antibiotic. It kills bacteria. So it's killing the beneficial bacteria in our gut, which make the enzymes, which make the neurotransmitters. And what she's saying, this should be studied. So Center of Disease Control has said a few decades ago, 1 in 100,000 US kids had autism. About 5 years ago, it had jumped to 1 in 68. 2 years ago, it was 1 in 35. And on the current rate of the exponential growth, in 2 to 3 decades, 1 in 2 children will be autistic. So here we have in India, 50% of our children are wasted and stunted because we've ignored the nutrition aspect of food. We focused on the commodity aspect of food. And in the US, 2 big giants sacrificing 50% of their future generations. Food is supposed to be about nourishment. And again, those farmers are affected with the spraying of Roundup. They're getting into debt. with GMOs and the patents and the royalty payment. And children who eat the food are getting affected. There is no boundary, there is no separation. There is no separation between us and nature. There's no separation between the country and the city. I want to conclude by saying there's no separation between violence. You don't restrict it in one place. Peace is a continuum and violence is a continuum. As I said, I wrote my book, The Violence of the Green Revolution, to understand the sudden upsurge of extremist violence in Punjab. I said, they were supposed to be prosperous. The Green Revolution was given a Nobel Peace Prize for creating peace for Punjab. So why is there violence? That's why I studied for the United Nations University. And I realized, of course, the resources were dying, the soils were dying, the water was disappearing, people were falling ill, now there's a cancer train, farmers were in debt, and they weren't getting enough for what they grew. As they said, we are getting indebted. We are getting into slavery. And at that point, they took the gun. Later, with the military being sent in, the crisis is still there. Now they commit suicide. It's not over. I want to leave you with two other examples of recent times, which you read daily in the newspaper. Everyone's hearing about Syria. Syria was not part of a conflict region. It was not part of the Arab Spring. It was not part of any problem. 2009, they had a severe drought, very severe drought. And droughts like this, like what we are seeing, extreme events, are linked to climate change. And as I've written in my book, Soil Not Oil, 40% of the greenhouse gases come from industrial chemical agriculture. 40% of the climate problem is industrial agriculture. But that same industrial agriculture is more vulnerable. When you have a drought, those crops fail because your soil has no strength. And in fact, the farmers from the areas with the untimely rain, because they were with me in Dehradun, I asked them, I said, were the damage equivalent in the chemical fields and the organic? They said, no, the organic survived. Because just like a child with good nutrition doesn't get infections as quickly, a plant with good nutrition has more resilience. So 40% of the climate problem in terms of emissions is chemical industrial agriculture. Chemical industrial agriculture gets wiped out with climate change. And our calculations show that we can literally pull out of the atmosphere enough carbon dioxide by putting it into the soil through organic matter and completing and mending that carbon cycle which has been broken through excessive use of fossil fuel, excessive use of chemical fertilizers, excessive waste of food and factory farming which leads to methane. But it isn't just solving the problem of emissions. It's solving the problem of your resilience on the ground. Our calculations show that if you have 0.5% soil organic matter, your water holding capacity in the soil per hectare is 80,000 liters. And if that goes up to 5%, which is not difficult, it can go up to 800,000 liters. That's the reason we were able to farm under rain-fed conditions. Because when you have organic farming in rain-fed conditions, without irrigation you can grow a crop. When you give up organic farming, your soil has no capacity to hold moisture and your crops will fail. But when those crops fail, in that vulnerability, on the scale it's happening today, the consequences are huge. So Syria, 2009, the extreme drought drives off 1 million people from the land, 80% crops gone, 70% livestock dead. Just take that scenario to Gujarat and imagine what would happen. So they come into the cities. Cities are not immune. And because the World Trade Organization has tied Assad's hand, no domestic support, no support to your farmers, he can't help them. So he starts to throw them into jail. The movement grows, anti-Assad movement grows, and the whole world comes to the help of the rebels. And before you know it, from the rebels grows this mysterious phenomena called ISIS. And the whole world is now in a tizzy on what do you do with ISIS. Meantime, every disgruntled youth of Europe is saying, wow, here's a regime change. I'm going to join ISIS. There was a very funny cartoon the other day in the International Herald Tribune, which said, there's this young girl in her room, in a messy room, and the mother's just gone out. And she's saying, the next time she comes in to tell me to clean my room, I'm going to join ISIS. Just a little humor about the frustration that's leading. And the other story you'll be hearing, it will be about Nigeria, and I'm not referring to Giriraj Singh. You know that silly comment he made about a Nigerian, and now the embassy is, that if Rajiv had been married to a Nigerian, she could never have become the head of Congress. Anyway, the phenomena there is something called Boko Haram, and every few weeks they pick up, kidnap people. This area is around Lake Chad, which was the biggest lake in that area. If you look at the maps, it's dwarfed into nothing. It used to support fishermen, farming, and herdsmen. All their livelihoods are gone. So they're joining. You know, when a normal economy of production gets over, one economy still survives. The economy of crime and violence. And Boko Haram is now picking up people from cities, kidnapping girls. I was just reading in the news on my phone, 15 students have been killed in Nairobi at the university. So we need to create peace in the countryside to ensure there's security and peace in the cities. And to create peace in the countryside means first we've got to create ecological security to allow people to have a secure livelihood. We've got to make peace with the planet. And second is we've got to recognize that our farmers are the first producers. They are fellow citizens. We can't design society saying, let's reduce them to 2% like America, which is the thesis, sadly, of government after government after government. We have too many farmers. We don't have too many farmers. We will either have 50% working peacefully and cooperatively to give us healthy food, in which case the farmer is your physician, to stabilize the climate, to give you water. And we need to, you know, when you go to a doctor and he gives you a bill of 5,000 for a 5-minute consultancy, you don't hesitate. And if the poor farmer, 2 rupees more, what jada ho gaya dam? And that unfairness that we built into our own thinking can only go when each of us realizes we all need food. And now with the kind of destructive agriculture, we need safe and healthy food. And only good local farmers can provide it. So all I would say, since you are all from architecture and planning, and build into your lives and build into your design food systems. With continuum of food systems now also in cities and urban areas, from terraces to balconies, to kitchen gardens, these gardens of hope, we build them everywhere, and you have such a huge campus. I hope some of you will form a group called Gardens of Hope and start a garden on this campus for 2 reasons. 1, to take a pledge to the earth, I will take care of you. Second, to realize that when you work with your hands and with the soil, it's not dirt, it's the basis of life. And we need a new pact with the soil. And it's that new pact in the soil that create a new balance between the city and countryside. And there's a third reason. When you work with the soil and it gives you food, you realize, wow, this is a very dignified, creative, and intelligent work. And we'll stop looking down at the farmers who are doing that same creative, intelligent work, and yet we treat it as unskilled. There's a lot to do. Your generation is the generation that's either going to be part of an India in disintegration or an India under resurgence. And I'm sure none of you will make the choice for being part of a process of ecological or social disintegration. Thank you. I took a little longer, but thank you.
questions, anybody?
Hello, ma'am. Thank you for that very interesting talk, ma'am. I have a elaborate question for you to ask. The distance between our peasants and small farmers and their rising cost of productions and consumers, which is us who live in the urban spaces, has widened to the effect of sheer apathy in the form of the recent IB reports which banned the GMO activism and deem it as criminal.
No, they didn't ban us.
Ma'am, as in... yeah, they didn't ban it, but my intent was that, ma'am, yeah. And the culture of corporate feudalism, which is in effect witnessed by the recent land bill which has been passed, which says that it promotes the intent to manufacture more and hence produce and develop our economy. Now, and ma'am, so my question is that how do we remove this sheer apathy which is there and this distance which has been created with the producers of our food and the consumers of our food, and how do we bridge that gap, and how do we realize that if our farmers are not well taken care of, we will not be fed well and we will not be able to develop.
Yeah.
And ma'am, just a small addition to that, the recent concept of smart cities and of the urban spheres which are being developed, especially in Asia, they lack the concept of local food, as you had rightly pointed out, ma'am. So I think that is the need of the hour, and how should we take steps in the right direction from henceforward?
Okay, so you've asked many questions in one, but very quickly. Let's begin with the last thing of smart cities. I think Ahmedabad's a smart city. That little corner, University Road, there's a beautiful neem tree right in the middle of the road. That's India. India was organic. It meant if there's a banyan tree in the middle, you go around it. It was never linear. You chop anything that comes in the way. We have the most ancient city in the world, Banaras. It's organic. And the assumption that cities must keep expanding, Banaras countered it till recent times, because the cities may stay small. I'm in Doon Valley, Rishikesh, Hardwar are there. Rishikesh was caves till I was a child. My dad gave the permission to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi to start his ashram. There was very small footprint. The Kumbh Mela gets organized, 30 million people come to either the Prayag, Allahabad or to Hardwar. 30 million come, and then there's not a sign that there was a crowd. It's back again. So it's not just an issue of apathy, it's an issue of misplaced intelligence. When I talked about Gandhi, Swaraj, and understanding every life form as self-organized intelligence, and that's what the new biology is teaching us. Every cell, the more than 50 trillion in our body is intelligent. They're communicating all the time. There's a Chinese study that did study on rice. They're finding out the rice RNA is talking to our cells. There's communication at every level. There's intelligence at every level. So this idea that, Marx had this idea that peasants are a bag of potatoes, and sadly, our government has this idea that peasants are a bag of potatoes. And the idea of smart cities is behaving in a colonial way, because this is how the colonials came. They call land terra nullius. Land is empty. If there are other people who are not like me, then I won't treat them as equals to human beings. So in this hugely crowded India of 1.3 billion people, the assumption of terra nullius can only do violation and violence. I used to go to Chhattisgarh for the tribals when we passed the law on PESA, the Panchayati Raj extension for scheduled areas, which created tribal self-rule. Tribals used to decide whether they want a steel plant or a mine or not. There was no violence. When those rights were violated and militias were created, the Sulva Judam, Then the tribals started to arm themselves, and now you got a Naxalite movement. So first you violate, and that's a violence, and then you create an ecology of violence. So I can predict you, 2019, next election, there won't be a single smart city. There'll be a lot of money made, a lot of contracts given, a lot of noise made. You don't build smart cities in an ancient civilization like that. Banaras is a smart city, Jaipur is a smart city, Ahmedabad is a smart city. First, learn the principles of their smartness. And then allow the organic growth. And the idea of bigness being smart is only one other entity has it, of not knowing when to stop, the cancer cell. Healthy entities know when enough is enough. No more. Eat this much, not more. Which is why all these companies put all kinds of addictions into food, and half the reason McDonald's supersize me or Coca-Cola keep drinking is because they actually put stuff like high fructose corn syrup that is addictive. In terms of what you said, this apathy and the gap, this is what I was trying to say to you is, food connects us. Now, food can connect us in celebration, awareness, and responsibility, or it can disconnect us in irresponsibility. First step in overcoming apathy is start a garden here and say, I'm a farmer too. You'll have solidarity immediately. Second step is take the initiative to link to farmers around Ahmedabad. When we build cities, we think of watersheds. We say, yeah, the water will come from Narmada, the water will come from here. In Dehradun, we know it'll come from the Mussoorie Hills. The concept of watershed must be supplemented with the concept of food shed. One argument constantly used to destroy farmers is, we have big cities. Okay, you have big cities, you have a big watershed, and you have a big food shed. Bigness doesn't mean you go 5,000 miles away or 10,000 miles away. Bigness is no justification for destroying the local. All it means is the local becomes a bigger local. Instead of a 1 kilometer, it might become 100 kilometer. So what, in your design, I really think you should have a project. What would be the food shed of Ahmedabad city? How many farmers around Ahmedabad would have to grow what to make sure you can get locally what you can get locally? And then I say there is a spice of life trade. After all, why did the British come here for the textiles and the spices? They can't grow spices in England. Their food was absolutely bland till they got the spices. They'll have to import spices. Even we in Gujarat will have to bring the spices either of Rajasthan or the Western Ghats. So what are the things that can be grown in Gujarat to produce ecologically? And this is the challenge of design in today's time. How much can be grown within the city? I mean, anywhere where a building is, I'm working very closely with the government of France because they have the COP21, the climate COP this year. And I was there last winter, and I just threw this out, this Gardens of Hope. Because, I really do believe in Gardens of Hope. They've passed a law that every commercial building will either have solar panels on the rooftop or a garden. So when you start designing it, all this is part of infection, then it becomes part of a fashion, and then it becomes part of bylaws. Our problem is we still follow the Macaulay principle. Macaulay had said, get the Indians, they have too much, they're too rich. The economy is too rich, their culture is too rich, so we can't colonize them. But if you make them feel that everything they have is inferior and everything we bring is superior, then it's a cakewalk, which is what the British did. Our languages are inferior, our clothing is inferior. They didn't have food, so they didn't touch food. And the Americans thought spread the McDonald's hamburgers and the Coca-Cola. And it's the same. So much energy goes into promoting junk food. Between advertising and subsidies, it's huge. So a very big part of removing that gap is awareness of healthy eating. The same young person who thinks it's too much to build an organic movement will spend 5 lakhs in a gym. And it's part of a schizophrenia. And the gym doesn't give you help because those silly things they're selling have all kinds of junk in them. And now people who go to the gym and eat these supplements are having all kinds of diseases. Because that's not food. So we've got, we will respect the farmer when we start to respect food.
Hi. I want to concentrate on the first part of what you're saying about the genetically modified organisms. And I accept the narrative that you have presented me with. It's something which I've not seen before. It's details which I haven't heard about before. The extent to which the idea of capitalism is being distorted to put patents on things which cannot be patented or should not be patented. But I have grown up in a way that leads me to think about the world in a way that technology will save us all, sort of thing. And isn't there a version of this narrative where perhaps not some of these companies that you've talked about today, but some companies who do significantly modify the organisms that we're used to interacting with, who significantly modify wheat or haldi or any of these other organisms in a way that does make them different, that makes them new, and changes the way they interact with our environment, that makes bamboo more carbon dependent, that makes bamboo absorb more carbon, or that makes, wheat require less water. Like these experiments that have been happening in Japan where they've managed to farm cabbages with, I think, 99% less water and 50% less energy or something like that. Isn't there space for that narrative? And within that narrative, isn't there a space for us to say, if you do this, then maybe it's all right for you to have some form of a patent on this. If you do this, you have contributed enough to this world that you have a right to recover the expense that you made, because isn't that the idea of a patent? You spent time and energy developing something, and so you get to reap the benefits. That's all.
Again, there are many questions in that one too. First, breeding has always modified plants. The rices we eat, and we had evolved 200,000 rice varieties. Dr. Risharia, India's top rice expert, was the person I turned to learn about seed saving, because he had saved the rice varieties first in Cuttack, and he started the Cuttack Rice Institute, and then the Raipur rice collection. None of the rices have anything to do with the grass called Oryza sativa. That's huge amounts of modification. So it's not the fact that other ways of breeding have not modified. The difference between genetic engineering and other ways of breeding is, first, you put genes that don't belong to that plant. So in the case of Bt, you put Bt toxin genes from a soil organism, a gene to produce a toxin in the plant itself in every cell. And we did soil studies a few years ago. Beneficial soil organisms are dying. We're repeating the study. I have a PhD working with me. I sent her down because she studied our farm, and we have 6 times more pollinators than the forest. She went to the Bt cotton areas. There wasn't one pollinator on a Bt cotton field. The monarch butterfly has come down to 10% of its population because this Roundup Ready crops, Roundup is killing the milkweed on which the larvae feed. And our Monsanto gives a conservation grant of $3 million when they sell $15 billion worth of Roundup, which is destroying the milkweed, saying, we'll make a little safe haven for the monarch butterfly. But that's not all. There are 2 words that have created massive confusion. One is the word environment, because everyone thinks it's something out there. And just the other day, I was doing a TV interview. I said, don't use the word environment, because then you'll go into development versus environment, and you'll go into all kinds of other stuff. Talk life. How much life are you willing to extinguish for whatever is your favorite project? It could be the spraying of Roundup, making smart cities, whatever. But the measure must be life and living systems. Yeah? And just like the environment has confused so many people into thinking it's some luxury out there, I mean, they've just released data that Delhi pollution is so bad that respiratory problems have doubled in the last few years. And doctors are saying to people, leave the town. But where will they go? The farmers are being removed from the land. You know, there's no place to go in the current model. The second word that's caused huge confusion is the word technology. All it means is a tool. A technology is a tool. And while we were coming from the airport, we were talking about how each of our cities has so many ages in it. And Didi Kosambi, the amazing mathematician and historian, had said the brilliance of India is not only that it's diverse in space, it holds the diversity and plurality of time. That all technologies of any time coexist in our times. And my dad, who was so much part of this philosophy, till the end, till he lived, always had a box with a lantern and a Petromax. Because he didn't trust the electricity, and sure enough, the electricity would go and we'd bring out the lantern and light it. So the fact that you get electricity doesn't mean you throw away the lantern. The fact that a Monsanto comes up with GMO doesn't mean you throw away your seeds. So technology means a tool is assessed. It's assessed in terms of how well it's relating nature to your needs. That's why we've always said, Arth, Dharma, Kam. Usse nikalta hai purusharth. So there's no connection with how many resources are you destroying? No. How much are you meeting your needs? Gandhi had a beautiful line in Hind Swaraj. The problem with this civilization, he says, about the industrial Western civilization, is it offers only one thing, bodily comfort, and it fails miserably even in providing that. Now, in terms of food, everything that's being done on food is to meet your bodily comfort for nourishment. But everything, whether it's the chemicals, the pesticides, the processing, or the GMO, it is undermining the bodily comfort. The GMO itself, as I said, one, you put a toxic gene, but it doesn't work because the tool is inefficient. You don't know when you shoot a gene where in the genome it's landing, or if it's being absorbed. So you add an antibiotic resistance marker to separate the cells that absorb the gene from those that did not. So every GM food has antibiotic resistance genes. Research has been done in independent labs that these genes are moving into our gut. We already have a huge antibiotic resistance problem. It'll just get aggravated with this. And the third, which is the most serious, which is never looked at. Because when you have an organ transplant, you have to receive many medicines to be able to retain the organ. Because plants and cells are all intelligent, they have a tendency to reject the introduced gene because it doesn't belong there. So they go through silencing, they don't allow its expression. So very virulent virus genes are added to enable the expression. When the SARS epidemic broke, Chinese scientists wrote to me and said, we think SARS is a result of hybridization of genes from the soya that's being fed to animals and then it jumping to human beings. And the H1N1 virus, it has viruses from 3 species, the pig, the chicken, and humans. This mixing, the way it works is, in physics we always talk of the barrier, and when you have a tunnel, you break the barrier. Basically, genetic engineering is breaking species barriers. Species protect themselves through species separation. When you break it through these moving of genes without studying the consequence, I'm just reading a very fat book by Stephen Ducker, Manipulated Genes, Twisted Truth, or Twisted Science, or something like that. But it goes into, because he filed a case and he's got all the papers from the beginning of all of this. And it was known what's happening, and they kept suppressing it and kept suppressing it and kept suppressing it. Early scientists had said, don't play with this. Asilomar Conference had said, let's put a moratorium. These tools are doing stuff we don't yet know. Let's study the impact. That's the simple thing about technology. Assess the impact, take responsibility, and go ahead. And you talked about, shouldn't a person be rewarded? But the two should go hand in hand. You're creating a new technology, whatever it is, could be gene technology, could be nuclear, whatever, assess its impact and internalize the costs. Nuclear cannot internalize the costs of waste management, which is why governments must always come in, which is why liability becomes such a big debate. Assess that, take responsibility for the costs. Don't say, I will externalize the costs, I will kill the butterflies, I will kill the soil organisms, I will let the farmers die, and then I will say I need a reward. I call this ontological schizophrenia. For the same entity, a Monsanto says I've made something new, therefore I need a patent. Same entity when it comes to biosafety and we say it needs to be assessed, they say, oh, it's just like nature made it. This is natural, we don't need to look. No, you can't have something novel and natural at the same time. So we need consistency. And I've always felt the reason I've carried on for so many years, and I must tell you, that intelligence, so-called intelligence report, the day it came out in the press, it never came through an official process. I immediately wrote my column and said, if you're looking for the foreign hand, just look for who wrote the report. And then I quoted Monsanto lobbyists from whom paras had been lifted. And the next day, they issued a new version and deleted all of that. I mean, what kind of intelligence report is it that they can just change pages overnight? So what we're really dealing with, and because I do this work not just in India, but on a world scale, we are dealing for the first time with science not being able to evolve in freedom and independence to inform society about what's really going on, particularly on the health issues like cancer and glyphosate. The second is, these corporations have gone so powerful that if one government says, no, we won't give you clearance, they can always bribe someone to give approvals. We have a technical expert committee of the Supreme Court that has given very, very strong criteria about what should be done. The top scientists of this country not being heard. And democracy. When we had the BT Bengan, I think there was an Ahmedabad hearing, whole country rose. And Jairam Ramesh, he had no opinion before. After the hearings, he said, Indians don't want it. So democracy said, no BT Bengan. And the only way it can go through is by destroying democracy. So science is getting hurt, democracy is getting hurt, and accountable government is getting hurt. So it's not about a tool alone. This particular tool is embedded in a very large context. And it has to be assessed in that larger context.
There are several brands that sell organic food products. Organic food which are expensive and also fashionable. With organic, I understand that it should follow a natural system or cycle where you do not need to add any external catalyst. So my question is, how organic are those organic farming?
If you ask me about Navdanya, I will say 200%. I won't speak about anyone else. We do it as our commitment to life. For us, the fact that we must help farmers to ensure they have access to a market, and we link the farmer to those who want to eat organic food, that piece of effort we do. But for us, it's not about trade. Anyway, I mean, all my institutions are not for profit. And I volunteer for all of them. So I'm not trying to see, how much money can Navdanya make as long as the farmers get the fair price. And the system keeps moving. And, it's quite a miracle. It's quite a miracle that 20 years with no help, no capital, no big company behind us, just on the steam of our own volunteers and farmers, and government coming every once in a while to say, "Aap Delhi haat mein kaise ho ji? Aapka package mein ye cheez missing hai." The way they should be going after those who don't label the chemicals and those who don't label. There's GMO stuff coming in and they're not labeling. There's a labeling law in the country. So sadly, 10, 15 years after we started, a lot of people said, "Isme paisa hai." Aur phir paisa bana rahe hain. It's up to you to ensure you make the direct connection. I don't think anyone should grumble organic is expensive. Anyone who cares about affordable organic should create the systems to make it affordable. Because it's not the farmer who's taking more. We ensure 10%, compared to the mandi price, because I think they deserve 5,000% more, but then of course no one will buy it. But 10% for the love and care that they put into the food. But I think, wherever, I've worked across the world, wherever farmers' markets got created, price of organic in farmers' markets fell. In the supermarkets, it's huge, because they too want to make more money. In Italy, they introduced laws of 0 kilometer, they call it. Every hospital, school, and institution must procure locally. That totally changed the pricing structure. And we need to do much more of that. I was so happy, the women who'd come for the gathering of Mahila Answaraj, villagers, farmers, saying, हमारे यहाँ आए थे, हमने ब्लॉक ऑफिसर से कह दिया, मिड डे मील स्कीम हमारे चावल से दी जाएगी, और हमने अल्टीमेटम दे दिया है कि जहर का चावल हमारे बच्चे नहीं खाएंगे. So wherever people will, and the 3 issues that will decide the fate of this country is seed sovereignty, food sovereignty, and land sovereignty. And land sovereignty simply means that if I got a little piece of land, no one has a right to forcefully alienate it. If I want to sell it, I'll sell it. But if I don't want to sell it, I shouldn't be forced. It's like taking out my organs.
Last couple of questions, one in the back there and then one here.
First of all, it's an incredible honor to hear you speak. So I just want to thank you for coming and speaking with us and sharing your ideas. Also, I just wanted to share that during my year here teaching at CEPT, the ideas that I've been working with the students to try to impart to them are very similar in the systems thinking type of thought that you're discussing tonight. So my question is really about some of the concepts that we've been discussing in our classes. And the specific one I wanted to bring up is we look at what happened in Cuba as an example for potential lessons to be brought to India. And in that case, I'm sure you know, but just for everyone else, there was a crisis there because global trade was cut off from Cuba after the fall of Russia. And as a result, they were forced to rethink local agriculture, and they now produce the vast majority of local fruits and vegetables right in the island, and a lot of it right in the city in Havana. So anyways, my question for you is, in Cuba's case, they had 2 things happen. One was a big crisis that basically forced them to rethink what they were doing. And secondly, they had a more communist type of foundational governance system in place that made what happened for them possible. So in the class, when we discuss this example, that's one of the barriers that comes up is, firstly, does India have to face a crisis first before we're able to rethink our agricultural system? And then secondly, we're a democracy, and can it happen for us like they did it? So I'm curious to hear about your thoughts on this.
Okay. Yeah, I've been to Cuba many, many times, including the very early days when they made the organic transition, and I was so impressed. In these urban gardens, they just grow all the food and put it on the gate for people to pick up. But what was unique about Cuba was everywhere else in the world, the organic movement had been built by people working on their own steam, me starting Navdanya or other organic farmers, Cuba, the entire system moved to organic. Scientists who till that time were top in the chemical model, overnight became agroecological. And they really started to apply all the science they knew along with organic farming. So it basically was a systems change. I think the fact that they had a strong person on top only facilitated the systems change. And they need someone as strong as that because they are sitting across from the empire, which has been trying to get rid of them forever. You're saying, will it work in India in the crisis? First, we have a crisis. And the three big indicators are the 250,000 farmer suicides, every fourth Indian hungry, and every second child so severely denied nourishing food. As I said, they're wasted and stunted, and this is National Family Health Survey data. And the third is the health epidemic. We are not realizing we are the capital of disease. In diabetes, we are the capital. And there are more people in rural areas with diabetes suddenly. It's called a lifestyle disease to make it look like you choose to get diabetes. If all you're eating is white polished rice because that's 2 rupees, and all your greens have been killed because you've been encouraged to spray Roundup, that kills everything green, sooner or later the high glycemic index of that rice is going to make you a diabetic in spite of your poverty. There's nothing about a lifestyle in this. There's a lot of policy in it. Obesity levels. Cancer. It's just that we are not keeping account. Our small neighbor Sri Lanka, when they started to get kidney failure, they immediately deployed their medical institutes and said, do the study. And what they found at the end of it through the epidemiology is Roundup, glyphosate, leading to kidney failure. Also verified in many research studies that organ damage is one of the problems. So we have a crisis. It's just that we are chasing this hallucination of smart cities. And we're not looking at the crisis. I mean, it's like you have a mirage. Now you think water aa gaya, water aa gaya, water aa gaya. So there is this nice mirage, and it's a very good comfort zone for a short while. But at the end of it, half your children so sick that they can't perform bodily and brain functions. So the crisis is there. The denial of the crisis is the problem. You're saying, we are a democracy. Can we solve the problem? In the only way we can. Thank goodness we are a democracy. It's because we are a democracy when young people like you will decide, I'm going to create a farmer's market right here on this campus and a garden. There isn't anyone who's going to say no. I'm sure your faculty will be only too thrilled and will join you in this initiative. So I think Cuba is an exception. It's democracy that is solving the problem most places. I work with all of the Mediterranean countries because after 2010, 2008 Wall Street crisis moved to Europe 2010. The 2010 crisis hit Southern Europe. Half of the youth of Southern Europe, Italy, Greece, Spain, Portugal are unemployed. I work with governments and communities to create employment when we do it always through urban agriculture. Rome has passed a law. The government of Rome works with me. They've passed a law on the issue of land and said, they asked me, they said, Dr. Shiva, your seed saving is so important. Is there a way you can connect it as an answer to unemployment? So I sat with them and looked at the maps of Rome, and they've got so many green areas. I said, why can't these be given to cooperatives of unemployed youth? There were IT companies that folded up. Bank workers didn't have jobs. They're all working on the land. And that's because democracy at that level allows a city called Rome to work independent of the European Union. Yeah. Yeah, I heard. As I mentioned, there were two very important laws that were introduced in the 1990s. I mentioned Pesa and how Chhattisgarh was really a land of vibrant democracy through Pesa, the Panchayati Raj extension to scheduled areas, which is also called the tribal self-rule, which is about land. When your land is being acquired, can it be acquired by force or will the village decide? It's the only law in the land in India which says the village community as a whole is an organic entity. The Gram Sabha, not a panchayat, will decide. And I won't go into details of how it was bypassed, but the result of the bypassing is what we see. So even what we see in the Naxalite areas is about land acquisition. I just had a call from Jharkhand saying, please come down, because we are fighting this land acquisition law. The second very big law in which I was also an expert is called the Forest Rights Act, which is partly linked to this issue because, forest rights were not recognized. And the preamble of this law says this is correcting a historic wrong. Now, basically the land acquisition of the British of the 19th century was based on what is called eminent domain. The state has absolute right and power. Now, that should have gone over after we became independent, but very conveniently, we never changed many of the colonial laws, including our police system. The reason our policemen misbehave so badly is because they're not designed to serve the public, they're designed to serve the empire. Now, both those laws are under attack. In addition, the amendments made to the 2013 amendments to the Land Acquisition Act came out of very severe conflicts. I myself had gone to Bhattaparsol, and when the leader was arrested, we gave him honor of a Bhu Satyagrahi. Nandigram, I was there. Niyamgiri, POSCO. These were huge movements. And lives were being taken. Out of that process, not only did we build a national process, and former Prime Minister VP Singh, late Prime Minister VP Singh, worked with me in this, basically we called it the Bhu Swaraj campaign. And we started to put groups together because land movements are very local, and we started to put them in a national network. Out of all that grew the pressure, which led to the amendments, and there were three key items that no democracy should be allowed to touch. The first is the issue of consent. In a democracy, you do not snatch away people's property. You don't. The second, and so this is the democracy clause. The second is a food security clause. Unlike most parts of the world, India has lands which are, they call them 3-crop land and 4-crop land. Amazing abundance. Chandrababu Naidu is grabbing 100,000 acres of 4-crop land to build a Singapore-style capital. He has no money to pay, so he's giving the farmers a slip of paper and saying it's a barter. We'll take the land, and when the Singapore has come up, you'll get a flat. So people, of course, up in arms. So the second is the food security angle, which is not about the individual farmer, it's about the nation. And no nation should fritter away the most fertile land for speculation, real estate, and what I call cementification. Because when the figures in, I'm doing a manifesto on land which will be released in May. According to the UN Convention on Land Degradation and Desertification, destroying fertile land and its ecological functions, the damage globally is $20 trillion. Much bigger. The 1.2 trillion damage that I talked about is bigger than India's GDP. So we are talking about damage much bigger than these little bits of figures we measure in our national accounting systems. So food security is a very important element, and sadly it's never addressed It's always bypassed. The third very important element is what's called the social economic assessment. And that's because in a village, you will have maybe 20% people with a title. 80% people depend on the farmland, either as landless workers or as the blacksmith who makes the equipment for that farmer, or the carpenter who makes the wheels for the bullock cart. Limitless work, 80%. And that's why the requirement that says, assess the damage on others. The discourse has been reduced to this. We're taking the land, we're giving them a fat compensation. What is it ignoring? It's ignoring the economy of soil. It's ignoring the economy of food. It's ignoring the rural economy, which is more than that parcel of land. And of course, it is bypassing democracy. So it's not going to be very easy, not only because it's not about the opposition alone. People were anyway resisting land grab with their lives. We've got a huge fat atlas on land grab. So then, whether there's a political party fighting for them or not, on the ground, the peasant and the tribal will continue to fight. And that's why I said, by the year 2019, it's not the smart city, but the land issue that will decide the fate of whoever has to come in whatever form.
One last question, maybe.
This is about, I'm working with Khadi, and I'm trying to promote organic Khadi. So we're trying to pick up, suggest the farmers to turn from BT cotton to organic Khadi. One of the things that I keep hearing from various sort of experts is that gomutra and cow dung is absolutely fantastic for the land and for purification and all that. And I've seen the results as well. But sometimes I wonder whether this is just our emotional response, our religious response, or how does this whole cow issue stand in the world farming situation?
Well, the cow issue is, of course, a very complicated issue, but on the ecology of soil fertility, the fascinating thing is, you had all of these amazing systems created. I mean, Albert Howard himself learned from the peasants and then did what he called the compost indoor method. Then you have the permaculturists, you have the biodynamic, you have all kinds of groups coming in. Doesn't become an explosive movement. But because of that memory of agriculture based on cow products, the Jiva Mitra, the Panchkavya, all of this, we use it in Navdanya, and we've done the research. There is an explosion of enzymes, there's an explosion of beneficial bacteria in a way that ordinary composting just cannot do. And not just that, it is also acting as a growth hormone, and it's acting as an it's acting for pest control too. It has so many functions. So, okay, some people might do it because gai ka hai. But it is literally the most efficient renewal of soil fertility. But not by itself, because if you don't do the green manures, if you don't do the companion planting with nitrogen fixing with cereals, if you don't do all of the other aspects of renewing fertility, you'll always get the excuse, "Bhai, gai bahut kam hai." I get this all the time. I said, okay, gai kam hai to green manure lagao na. When I said India was a garden, you go to areas where things haven't been destroyed. Even UP, even 10 years ago, fields would have these hedges of green manures. The Dhencha, the Sespania. But in areas where the Green Revolution monocultures have come, it's gone. You still go to Kerala, you go to parts of Tamil Nadu, you see or Western Ghats, you see the hedges, dense with biological matter and full of green manure. And some of them are edible too, very rich in iron. And so we do a lot of the research on this stuff. And I now run, because of the demand, we run courses for farmers all the time. Every week there's a group from some part of the country. And then when I travel, I find somebody who will say, I was at the farm 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But now we offer a course for anybody and everybody called the A to Z of Agroecology and Organic Food Systems. We run it 1st of September to 30th of September. And we do living seed, which is about seed saving, breeding. Coming back to the GMO question, the real intelligence is in breeding. In genetic engineering is not breeding because you're not working with the plant. You're working with cells in a Petri dish. I call it the Petri dish worldview. And you don't see too much in a Petri dish. And a colleague who used to be in Aleppo, which is now bombed out, he used to be at ICARDA, the big Arid Zone Research Center. He's now in Hyderabad. He comes and teaches with me. And he has evolved a whole new concept of participatory and evolutionary breeding. Participatory in the sense the farmer's a breeder, scientists are breeders, put them together. And evolutionary, amazing. Knowing that we are in a period of climate change, recognizing that the plants have evolutionary intelligence, allow them to do the adaptation, and they will tell you what's good for the changing climate. And the results are just amazing. Then we do living soil, because in Green Revolution book, the soil is a container to pour NPK into. And then living food, because in the dominant paradigm of Maggie and McDonald, it's you just stuff yourself with it. And you want it because of the addictions in it, but not because of its authentic health or taste. So we do that, and any of you who have the possibility, please do write to us and see if you can do it. And if you can't do the whole, come for the part that you really find interesting. But there's a lot of science to ecological manuring. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva. May I request Professor Jigna Desai to give the vote of thanks?
Thank you, Chirayu. I thank Dr. Shiva for a very insightful and compelling talk on what it really means to be earth and human-centered, and also aspects of making explicit the aspects of design that are related to diversity, that are related to indigenous knowledge, and are related to self-organization. Really thank you for this. I'm sure a lot of us, there are a lot of thoughts that have triggered in our heads, and I'm sure the students will take a lot back when they go back to their classes. I also thank Faculty of Architecture Alumni Association and Friends of the Alumni, or Friends of the Faculty of Architecture, for organizing this, and CEPT University, and the audience for being an amazing audience today. Thank you.